I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. The Small Farms Network has been rethinking how we deliver training events for small farmers over the next few months in ways that allow you to keep learning farm skills when it's not safe to meet in one place because of COVID-19. The webinar format is allowing us to reach new audiences from further afield, so it's really an exciting time for us. Some of you will have met me at workshops, so it's nice to say hello from my home to yours. To all our new participants, welcome and thanks for joining us here today. So I will just make a note about that, about us joining from home. I'm fairly lucky because I'm on broadband, but Dr Lou is out in the sticks. So if there is a little bit of a delay with our sound or with a video, I hope you'll just bear in mind that that's just because of our connections, but hopefully everything will run smoothly. So just a little bit about the network. We are a community-based group led by farmers, for farmers, based just outside Canberra. Our services include organising workshops and webinars, newsletters, organising group vaccination programs for livestock, such as our Good Air Vaccination Clinic. We also have information via our Facebook page and on our website. Most of our workshops are hosted on small farms, giving you skills-based information where and when you need it. We offer annual memberships for a range of services, including a member's email, advance notice of events, and special member events. Membership is available on our website. Our committee is run by volunteers, and what an amazing group they are. Their hard work makes this webinar possible. Thanks to Haji, Jacinda and Alice McGlashan for their help in designing this webinar and their technical support today. The Small Farms Network received funding from the Every Bit Counts project. And thank you to the staff at New South Wales Southeast Local Land Services for their ongoing support, and in particular to Dr Lou Baskind for being with us today. So I'm just going to explain a little bit to you about how you can participate today and what's happening for you today, because some of you might be new to the webinar format. You can see on your screen that you'll be unmuted and that you won't have your video. At the bottom of the screen or at the side, you'll see that you have a chat and you won't be able to share your screen, but you have a chat function and there's a poll function. And at the side, you'll be able to type in your chat question. Now, some of you have already submitted questions today, and we have selected a few that we'll run through at the end of the webinar. And if you do post a chat or you participate in a poll that Lou or I will be launching, everything that you write is anonymous. Although we can see your name. Well, your name will just pop up there. Like, so if I typed in a question now, you'd see my name pop up. We are recording this session, and a recording link will be posted, and a webinar summary will be published on our website. And I'll do that within about a week or so. The webinar summary will include references and links that Lou discusses during the webinar today. After the webinar, you will be directed to a post-webinar survey, and it would be wonderful if you could complete this survey to help us plan and improve our webinars. You can also provide any feedback via email. So just in terms of what to expect, the webinar will run for approximately an hour. If we have a lot of questions, it may go for 5 to 10 minutes longer. So we hope that you can stay and enjoy the webinar with us. So it really is my pleasure today to introduce Dr Lou Baskind from Braidwood, Southeast Local Land Services. Lou has joined us several times before at workshops, and we are delighted to have her with us here today to present this webinar. Lou has a passion for small farms and backyard chickens and is a great supporter of all farmers, big and small. So if you just bear with me for a minute, I'm just going to hand over to Lou now. And Lou's going to turn on her microphone so we can say hello. Hi, Lou.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yeah, that sounds great, Lou. Thanks. Yeah, it's good.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex. And thanks for the introduction. As Alex said, I'm the district vet with the local land services in Braidwood. So my sort of main roles are disease surveillance, so keeping an eye out for outbreaks of any of the notifiable diseases. And then I work with all sorts of farmers, big and small and experienced and new, working in the sort of field of advisory for any production animals. So I'm just going to share my presentation screen with you now. Just bear with me one moment. Here we go. So hopefully that's the right screen there. And you should get that, the start of that presentation there. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us and taking time out of your weekend to learn a bit more about chickens. I'd like to get started actually straight away with a bit of a poll. Now, I'm just going to get that running. So what you should see coming up in front of you shortly is a question and answer there. And you can vote for more than one response, but basically I'm just really interested to know, why do you keep backyard laying chickens? And if you don't have chickens yet, just answer, sort of why you're thinking of getting them. And I'm just going to let it run for probably about 1 minute, just to give everybody a chance to respond there. I can see people have started voting already, which is fantastic. So you can see there's a few different answers there for pets and fun, for the garden, for eggs, for the welfare of the chickens, for showing and breeding, and a few, and the option of letting us know in the chat box if there's something else. So we're getting to the end of that poll now. It's been running for a minute. We've had about 83% of our attendees vote, which is an excellent response. And I think it looks like everybody's who's wanted to say what they think has said it. So
Lou, I'll just say that Natalie piped in on the chat box and said, for teaching kids about living things and the life cycle. So that's a lovely one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really lovely one too.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to end the poll, and I'll share the results with everybody so you can see what everyone had to say. So you should there see the results. So our top answer was for eggs, and of course that's a really big reason why we've got laying chickens in the backyard, so that we can eat the lovely fresh eggs. It looks like lots of people are implementing that into a system where they're benefiting the garden as well. We've got welfare quite high up there on the list, and for fun and pets. So that's fantastic. I'll stop sharing those results now. So that gives everybody a bit of a sense of what everybody else is doing. And I'll just get that poll out. So this question is something that I ask people all the time whenever I'm talking to owners of chickens. I'm always interested to know. And one of the, and here is a list of previous responses that I've got, which, and actually I think teaching, there we go, teaching children is actually on that one as well. So that has come up before as well. So lots of really just kind of wonderful different reasons why we have them. One of the big ones that does often come up for me is that people feel really strongly that they want to eat eggs from chickens that have better welfare than commercial industry chickens. And that does seem to be very important to a lot of people who have chickens in the backyard. So I guess a really important question to ask following on from that is do your chickens actually have better welfare than a commercial industry chicken? And I want you to challenge us on, because how do you know that they do? How do you measure that? And so one way that you can is something called the 5 freedoms model. So the 5 freedoms model, Animal Health Australia describes that as a universally accepted cornerstone for assessing and ensuring animal well-being around the world. And you have a look at whether the animal that you're assessing has these 5 freedoms, which I'll list for you now. So the first one is freedom from hunger and thirst. Then we've got freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, and disease, freedom to express normal behaviors, and freedom from fear and distress. Well, in most backyards, we're already starting to offer a bit of number 4, freedom to express normal behaviors, because they're in a more natural environment and they can, scratch around and peck and move around. They've got space. And that sort of scratching and pecking behavior is natural for them. That's how they would normally find food in the jungle, where they sort of naturally from. So we've got number 4 working pretty well for us there. But what about the others? So today I want to cover some of the really practical things that you can do to start ensuring that all of the 5 freedoms are being met. And from my perspective as a vet, I'm going to talk about some of the ways you can prevent and avoid discomfort, disease, and distress. And thinking about animal welfare in this way, that allows you to do so much more in order to make your chickens really happy, and also to be comfortable in knowing that they do have better welfare and are enjoying the best possible quality of life. And the great benefit of good animal welfare, when you follow the 5 freedoms model, is that it flows on to good production. So you use the model and you also get fresh, safe, and healthy eggs, which in our poll at the beginning, we saw that that's actually a high priority for most of you that have got backyard laying chickens. So what a bonus if you can have really good quality of life for the chooks and fresh, safe, and healthy eggs for you. So what I'm going to do through this webinar, I'm going to take just a simple basic backyard setup, and then I'm going to home in on some specific, just sort of practical tricks and tips that you could start implementing straight away. And as I go through each one, just start to think about, does it correspond to your own backyard setup or what you're planning to do if you don't have chickens yet? Does it apply to you? Maybe you're doing it already, maybe you can improve it a little bit. So just sort of take each one and reflect on what you're doing. Okay, so let's have a look at our basic backyard layer chicken setup. So I'm just going to click play on this little video. It's a little bit jerky, but you'll sort of get the idea. That's our scenario that we're working with, which it's a fairly standard setup. Yours might look a bit different, but the fundamental elements are going to be quite similar. So what we have there is essentially you've got a coop, which is the house that they're going to sleep in at night, and it's got usually got the egg box in there, which is where they're laying their eggs. A fenced yard area, somewhere where you give them food, somewhere where you give them water. Maybe some of you have got them, leaving this yard area and free ranging through the rest of the garden as well. But that's not always the case. Sometimes we're not able to do that, so that yard might be their permanent home. And you might have a chicken tractor, which essentially is the same thing as this, all the same fundamental elements, but you can move it around. So now let's start homing in on each of these elements in this scenario. So let's talk about water, first of all. So a good rule of thumb is to offer about 5 times the amount of water as the amount of food, to have that available to them. That's the minimum. remembering that in hot weather, they're going to drink more. And in summer, you need that water to be cool enough that it's actually helping them to regulate their body temperature, because they can suffer from heat stress, and they can become quite ill from heat stress. So the cool water helps them to keep their body temperature regulated. And remember, in winter, particularly around here where we have frosty mornings, those water bowls can actually freeze completely over the top. And I have seen chickens get dehydrated quite badly because they couldn't actually get to the water. And you can see there's a picture there of the top of a water bowl that I pulled off on a frosty Braidwood morning, recently actually, this winter. So chickens actually need very clean water. Dirty water makes them sick. So while some animals, they can do okay drinking from a muddy dam, for example, so you might have that image in your mind of farm animals can drink from dams. Chickens actually need much higher quality water than that. So look at the water bowl, and if you wouldn't drink it, you shouldn't expect the chickens to do well on it either. You just need to clean that water bowl every day, just with a bit of a physical scrub. So you don't need to get fancy, just empty it out, give it a quick scrub, fill it up again. If it's really mucky, a little bit of detergent, and then rinse it out nicely afterwards, and a splash of vinegar can help to just keep the algae down as well. You might get a bit of algae on a warm sort of summer's day. A bit of vinegar can help with that, but just making sure that you're giving it a physical scrub and getting all the grubby bits out of it in nice, clean, fresh water. So let's talk about the food next. Now, I know that it's a really big challenge to wade through all the information that's out there. There are a lot of different opinions, and like nutrition in the human world as well, if you think about it, there's all these different diets, there's different eating habits, there's lots of claims about what's the healthiest food and all that sort of thing. So I'm just going to take it down to basics a little bit so that you've got a bit of understanding of what they actually require. I also want to say that if you're new to chickens, I would probably just say start off with buying a commercially produced chicken food and sort of build up your confidence with the other husbandry tasks before you launch into formulating your own ration. If you do want to do your own ration formulation, there's some really good online resources and courses that can help you along. But so for the purposes of this webinar, I'm just going to focus on what pre-formulated food to buy. So chickens are naturally what's called an opportunistic omnivore. So they consume naturally a huge variety of different foods. So things like fruits, roots, seeds, snails, bugs, anything, worms, anything, imagine them sort of in the jungle, scratching around. One day they might come across an ant's nest and go, oh, lots of ants today, fill up on ants. And then the next day it might be some grass seeds and things like that. So they're just looking for whatever they can find. And so because of this variety, their diet actually has a lot of different nutrients in it. But you can split that into the bigger categories of energy and protein. And then you sort of talk about all the little micronutrients as well. So minerals like calcium are quite important, and the other essential vitamins, minerals, and fatty acids. So if we split it into just those broader categories, they basically need to survive. They need water, energy, and a bit of protein, basically to power their body. But when it comes to thriving, a major factor is the balance of that protein and those micronutrients. So thriving is a word that I use to describe when an animal's not just staying alive, but things like their immune system, their egg laying, the molting of the feathers, they're all operating at their peak without too much stress and sort of draw on the chicken's normal day-to-day operation. You can think of it a bit like a budget. So if your salary only just sort of barely covers the basics of rent and utilities, and then you get a big bill in the post, I mean, that's sort of budget shock. And what are you going to do? You're going to have to put it on the credit card, and then for months afterwards you're thinking, oh, I've got to find a little bit extra each month to actually pay off that bill. So it's the same thing. There's a finite amount of protein and it gets divided between the different sort of bodily functions. So protein is actually essential for a large range of functions. So growth, feather molting, really important for egg production, for the immune system to fight off disease and all the hormone regulation. So you sort of try to say, well, is there enough to split between all of these conflicting priorities without something sort of having to drop off? And then in terms of the main micronutrients, as I said, from all that variety, their diet is actually generally composed of a lot of different micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, but the main one that we're going to talk about, which is absolutely essential, is calcium, because the egg shell is actually 94% calcium. So we'll get to that. So when we're talking about commercially produced chicken feed, we want to know, does it actually do what it claims to do on the bag? And if you think about it, commercial feeds, they're very precise formulations. You know, they deliver everything that's required in the right amount so that they can support maximum egg production and robust immune systems. Because if you think about the fact that this is global production of food for egg-laying chickens, they need food that's going to make chickens lay a lot of eggs and not die from diseases. But the caveat to that is that they develop from very controlled circumstances. So when the research science goes into saying, well, how do we balance out this food for a laying chicken? They're actually looking at a leghorn, well, usually something like this, a leghorn type breed. It's laying white-shelled eggs. It's weighing 1.8 kilos body weight. The egg is an average 47 grams. They're laying 6 eggs a week. They're in a cage system. They house it at an average climate controlled of about 22 degrees Celsius. And also they don't last very long in the system. So, you know, in those commercial systems, these birds are living to maybe 18 months, maximum 2 years, and then they're actually being disposed of. So that probably doesn't sound very similar to your chooks in your backyard. So what we've actually found is that free-range backyard chickens in Australia do seem to need a bit more protein than those commercial situations that the food is made for. So what you would prefer to do is to actually have a look and see if you can get a feed that for a pre-lay pullet, so that's an almost adult chicken that hasn't quite started laying eggs yet, but is close, they should actually be getting 14% total protein in their diet. And then once they're actually laying eggs, they should be getting about 16% total protein. So taking the budget analogy before about trying to divide the protein between the different functions, what I'm suggesting is that you give your chickens a bit of a raise in their salary. And I also prefer, so the feed can come in different forms, but the grain mix, which is also known as a scratch mix, that allows the birds to sort of sort through and be selective. And they don't always do themselves favors when they choose which grains to pull out of that mix. So they tend to go for high energy grains, not necessarily high protein grains. So they prefer, you know, in that mix that you can see the picture of there, they probably go for the corn. And also you then get some wastage, which can attract other creatures like, you know, rodents and wild birds, and it's a waste of money because they're not going to eat everything. So try and get them onto a pellet, or the other option is a mash. So that's a sort of a milled mix that you add a bit of water to, almost like a porridge, and then you feed it out as a regular meal. So just to reiterate that again, when you're buying chicken food, look at the protein percentage, and remember that it's the protein that's helping them to stay healthy by driving a strong immune system, egg production, hormone cycles, feather molting, growing bodies, all of that is really being driven by that protein. And if you think that your chickens aren't doing great on a particular food, just try and find one where the protein's a little bit higher than what you're using at the moment and see if it helps. So try that in situations where you think, oh, the hot weather is really knocking them around, or they're molting and that really seems to be knocking them around, or they keep getting infectious diseases and I don't know why. Have a look at that protein percentage and see if you can lift it up a little bit. It also plays a role if you notice that you're having feather pecking issues. So whereas there's a sort of social component to that, but feather pecking can be a result of them actually trying to find more protein. And then if you're currently feeding a scratch mix, think about whether you can move them over to a pellet or mash, and then just use that scratch mix as a bit of a treat and a bit of a stimulation of those natural behaviors where they can sort of go and have a bit of a scratch around, but that's after they've actually had their sort of main ration of food. So while we're on the subject of nutrition, let's talk about calcium. Now, getting the calcium right means you get a really good, strong eggshell. And that's actually really important for you in terms of food safety and storage of that egg, because the eggshell is protecting the inside contents of the egg from the outside world. So it's not letting sort of bacteria and things like that in through the shell to the egg. Which, if you're going to hatch those eggs as well, so if you're doing a bit of breeding, baby chickens, you're going to get a better hatching rate as well, because the embryo in there is not going to get an infection. And, you know, less wastage, so less broken, cracked eggs as well. And it's actually, the calcium is also important for the physical pushing out of the egg when she's laying it. So if the calcium content is too low, you can get issues with egg binding, which can be quite disastrous for chickens. Now, the chicken forms that eggshell in, well, they call it the egg gland. It's essentially her uterus. So this is a picture of her reproductive system. The yellow dots at the top is where that's her ovary, where she's releasing the egg yolk, so ovulating the egg yolk, and it travels through the reproductive system, making the soft parts of the egg. And here in the eggshell, in the egg gland, is where she actually makes the eggshell. She makes the eggshell by basically having a fluid in there that's very, very, very rich in calcium. So rich in calcium, in fact, that it crystallizes onto the surface of the soft part of the egg, and that's how the shell is formed. So she gets the calcium into that fluid from her bloodstream, and she gets the calcium into the bloodstream from her diet. So when she eats the food that has calcium in it, it gets absorbed in her intestinal tract and goes into the blood. Now, if she's not sort of requiring it right at that moment, she's not making an eggshell at that moment, some of it's going to get stored into her bones, and some of it's just going to get excreted in the droppings. And this is a constant process. So the calcium coming in the diet, going into the blood, going into the eggshell gland, going into the bones, coming out. She sort of keeps this balance going all the time. But as you can see from this picture, it actually takes 15 hours for her to make an eggshell. And the majority, if you think about when they lay their egg, they're laying sort of, morning, mid-morning, maybe early afternoon. That means that egg shell is mostly being built at night. And so we want to make sure that the calcium in the blood is actually available there at the same time as she's making the eggshell. And there's a few ways that you can actually do that. So just click through these. So you want to make sure that they've got access to calcium whenever they need it. So even though their food ration will have some calcium in it, they should also have some calcium in a separate bowl that they can just peck at whenever they want. So it can be in the form of shell grit or limestone or eggshells that have been dried to remove egg material. There's lots of different sources of calcium that you can actually provide, but you want it there to be whenever they want it, they can go and grab some. And the other really important thing is that the calcium should be in lots of different sizes. So the bigger particles of the calcium source are going to take longer to be ground down and therefore longer to dissolve in the gut. And it's like giving them a slow release tablet almost. So through the night when they're sleeping and building their eggshell, they're still busy grinding down bits of calcium that are going into the bloodstream as and when they need it. The reason you need to do this is because if there's not enough calcium in the blood, they then need to draw calcium out of the bones. Like I said, that is a natural process, But if it's done too much or too heavily, it can really cause problems. So you can actually get to the point where those bones are so weakened by having all their calcium removed that a chicken could just break a bone from normal daily activity. You've got to be quite careful to make sure that you're constantly replenishing this calcium that they're putting out in the form of an eggshell. And just as an aside, by the way, the word grit, so I said shell grit before, if it's just grit, so the product referred to as just grit is little small stones that chickens use internally to grind their food down, because they don't have teeth. They've got a sort of internal muscular stomach that grinds their food. And that, if it's just called grit, that doesn't have calcium in it at all. You could give them grit as well, but being in a backyard, they're probably going to find a few little stones here and there anyway. That's not nearly as important as supplying this calcium-based source. And I've just got a picture there for you to see what it looks like, some of the different products that you can get that actually supply calcium to the chicken. Okay, so let's sort of press on thinking about our sort of backyard chicken setup, and I'm going to talk about the floor of the outside, the sort of ground of the outside yard now. And this is where chickens are potentially going to pick up worms. And I suppose the useful or first sort of question to ask is, should we even care about worms in chickens? And the answer is yes. It's like in other species. You know, worms can cause diarrhea, weight loss, anemia, even potentially death in birds and other species. And just like in other animals, it's more of a problem in young animals, animals under stress, animals with insufficient protein in the diet actually are much more susceptible to problems with worms, or when the number of worms are really high. So let's just think about how chickens actually get worms. Basically, you've got little worm larvae that are on the ground in the droppings of chickens. And then while she's pecking the ground, the chicken takes up that larva while she's looking for a morsel of something to eat. And then once that larva is in the chicken, it grows into an adult worm, which can then produce little worm eggs. Those come out in her droppings. Now, the eggs that are there in the droppings, they have to develop from an egg to a larva, and then once they're a larva, the next chicken, or the same chicken again, can come along and pick it up. I'm just going to play this short animation for you. I think it takes about 30 seconds, just so you can watch and see that sort of visually what I'm actually explaining there. And so the cycle continues. So now that we know the life cycle of the worm, let's think about what strategies we can use to control or prevent them. If you have a look at the chemical deworming products that are available, you can see that the way that all of them work is actually to kill the adult worm. Essentially, they paralyze the adult worm and then the adult worm is expelled. So when you're seeing worms in the droppings after you use one of these, it essentially means they did have worms and the product worked to kill them. But killing the adult worm sort of isn't the end of the story, because you still have their eggs in the environment, which are just going to develop into larvae and then be eaten by the next chicken and continue to reinfest. So, and it's not practical to just use a chemical only to control this worm life cycle, to break the worm life cycle, because you would just end up that you'd have to dose them sort of every 1 to 2 months forever. And then you're going to run into risk with residue and toxicity, and there's an expense and the effort, and also the worms can then become resistant to those chemicals if you're constantly exposing them to them. So there's a few other simple strategies for reducing worm infections in chickens. So a chemical product is killing the adult worm inside the chicken. So that's the part of the life cycle we're using the chemical. But the other thing you can do using the chemical product is don't bring the worms in to your backyard in the first place. So particularly if you're getting new chickens, you really should, that's the time really where a chemical dewormer is most useful, because you can sort of clear them out before you're bringing them into the same area as the chickens you already have, and preventing any contamination with those worm eggs. The next thing you can do is not let the chickens pick up those larvae on the ground. So just doing something really simple, like feeding them in a bowl or a raised trough or a feeder, not on the ground where the droppings are, and keeping the bowls clean, cleaning the bowls frequently, daily is best. You're avoiding that situation where when they go to pick up food, they're also picking up worms. Essentially, simply put, don't make birds eat their own poo, because that's when they're going to pick up not just worms, but other infectious problems as well. And then the other thing that you can do is you can actually stop this process here of the worm egg developing into a worm larva. So even though worms and worm eggs are pretty adaptable to a lot of situations, a variety of conditions, they don't really do very well if they're really, really dry. So the eggs actually need some humidity to develop into an infectious worm larva. So dry conditions are going to kill that egg. So think about if you have damp areas in the yard, they're going to be worm hotspots. So you really want to find ways to dry them out, improve your drainage, put in, some kind of absorptive litter, or sawdust or sand or lime or diatomaceous earth, whatever it takes, but just keep the yard really dry, and then you're breaking that part of the worm life cycle as well. And I just want to pop back to now that question again of sort of saying, well, what about using the deworming chemicals? And just a note on registered chemicals in chickens. So a registered chemical is one that's been independently tested and scientifically assessed, so that you can be sure that not only is that product safe for the chicken, but it's safe for the consumer of the egg or the meat of that chicken. And remember, the consumer is you and your family and your friends eating those eggs. So you can safely take that product, read the instructions on the bottle, use it as it says, and you can say, this will be safe for my chickens, this will be safe for me. There are other products out there that can be used for treating worms in chickens that are not registered for that. So this is what we call off-label. So that means the product isn't officially approved in that species or for that purpose. And if you're going to use a product off-label, it really is worthwhile talking to your vet, because they're best placed to talk to you about the appropriate dose rate, the withholding periods, as well as how to use it in a safe and effective manner, and to prevent resistance developing to that product, to prevent residues in the egg or the meat afterwards. So while, all that advice from your chicken keepers and enthusiasts online, it's very well meaning, but it might not be fully informed. They might not know your whole situation and what the impacts are of making that off-label decision. And I want you to have sort of all the information you need to make a safe decision for your poultry and for yourself and for anyone else who's going to eat the eggs that your chickens produce. So a good approach is to only go off-label when you're doing all these other methods that I talked about in terms of breaking that life cycle, and you're doing them well, and you still can't get on top of a problem, or your chickens have a parasite that isn't killed by a registered chemical and it needs to be treated, and you've spoken to a vet about it. That's a good sort of rule of thumb of when to go off-label. Now, while we're still talking about sort of parasites and pests, I'm going to move on and talk quickly about lice. So lice are little small wingless insects that chew on, feathers and skin and blood of the chickens. And an infestation is extremely irritating to the chicken, and it can be quite distressing, and it can be really sort of depleting of their health, and they can become really quite unwell. So And then what the lice do is they sort of cement their eggs onto the feather shafts, and they create these sort of really unsightly, uncomfortable big lumps of eggs on the chickens. And actually, one of the most important ways that chickens control their own lice is by dust bathing. So there've been some really fascinating studies where they've sort of taken similar groups of chickens and offered or given access to one group versus another group. One had a dust bath, one didn't. And the number of parasites on the chickens that had a dust bath was 80% less than those that didn't have a dust bath. So it's very effective at parasite sort of control. Their natural, it's just their natural behavior to manage those parasites. So it can just be sort of a nice clean area of dirt that they find themselves. But if you've got concerns that there might be sort of pests and parasites around, you can construct a specific dust bathing area. And if you're starting from scratch and you don't know what to put in it, I would just start with some washed playground sand that you can get for be the same as for a kid's sand pit. Basically, it just needs to be something dry. And then you can actually look at some other additives as well. So earth or sulfur powder. So sulfur is a very sort of old and effective insecticide, and diatomaceous earth is this superfine powder essentially made out of prehistoric shells, and it just makes the situation really unpleasant for external parasites. Just again, it dries them right out, and they die from that. So just before using these products, just have a read, make sure that you're comfortable. They're known to be safe, but just take care, wear your eye protection and your mask when you're working with them, because these superfine powders can get into your eyes and into your lungs. Now, if you have a really bad infestation, preventatives like the dust bathing and the diatomaceous earth and sulfur, it might be insufficient, in which case you need to use a chemical treatment. And the same principles apply for registered chemicals and off-label. In fact, the problem being that there are no registered chemicals for lice in laying chickens. So this is one of those situations where you've got a parasite not covered by a registered product, and you need to treat it. So again, worth just having a talk with a vet there, just to make sure that you know how much to use, how to use it, how long to not eat the eggs for, that kind of thing. Okay. And remember that the lice eggs themselves are really resistant to any treatment, whether it's a dusting powder, a dust bath, or a chemical treatment, because they sort of cemented in this sort of solid shell. Whatever you use is not going to kill the eggs. So you want to try and remove the eggs. Please don't pull the feathers out. It's really painful for the bird, but just try and trim the eggs off with maybe some nail scissors or something like that. And also repeat your treatment 2 weeks later. So any eggs that were left will then have hatched, and then you can kill the lice as they're sort of emerging from there as well. Now, lice are species specific. So a chicken louse only infests a chicken, a human louse only infests a human, a sheep louse only infests a sheep. But having said that, lice can hitch a ride with wild birds. So if you've got wild birds that are crowding around chickens, for example, around a feed bowl where they can get in and try and get to that food at the same time, the lice can crawl off the chicken onto the bird, hitch a ride to your place, and then they crawl off the bird and onto your chickens and set up shop. So that's one of the many good reasons to try and exclude wild birds from your chickens. Now, obviously, you can't entirely exclude them if they are free ranging. But definitely a reason to make sure that your feeding stations are inside the yard, and that excludes wild birds. So a bird net over the top of your yard where the food is, so that the wild birds can't get to the food. Or some people have had success with things like treadle feeders. And actually, there was a segment on Gardening Australia last week that showed you how to make what they called a bucket feeder, a hanging bucket feeder. And I'd actually be really interested to know if anyone gave this a go. But the idea with that as well is that the chickens they peck this little pendulum, and a few bits of feed fall out, which they quickly clean up, and that keeps the rats and the wild birds away.
Lou, it's Alex here.
Yes.
Look, we've just got a few questions on our chat that I think maybe we might pop in. If is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
All right, mate. So just relating with to lice, the
Yes.
question was, could you use pestine to treat
Yes.
lice?
Yeah, so pestine sort of fits into that same category of dusting powders. So I think it's called rotenone is the powder itself. So it's similar in how it works to the sulfur and the DE, in that it sort of creates this really dry and unpleasant environment for the lice. So yes, and that is safe to use on the birds as well. There is a sort of a little bit of murmuring that registration for that product might get taken away. It has in the States, because it's not felt that the rotenone is super safe for human use. So again, just making sure you're using that eye protection and that and the face mask when you're actually dusting it around.
Okay. And just on lice as well, if there's signs of lice, are there cases where molting is actually a sign of lice? Like, so is molting a symptom of lice?
So molting is not directly related to having lice. Molting is a natural process that the birds will go through sort of every year or two, where they'll basically get a whole new set of feathers. But that does happen in I would say most cases, a kind of relatively symmetrical way. So if you're just finding that chickens are losing feathers, it might be because they're actually trying to groom these lice out and are pulling their own feathers, or another chicken is pulling feathers. So if it seems very non-symmetrical and just sort of patchy, it may not be molting at all. But the feather health is obviously, compromised when there's lice there. So the same things as you would do to sort of support molting, which is making sure that protein is adequate. You can also use a bit of like a seaweed supplement, because iodine can help with feather health as well. So you can sort of support feather health in a lice infestation in the same way as you would with molting. But yeah, a bad infestation could look like a chicken is molting, but they're not directly related.
And so can I just tuck one in there just about worming? So the question was, with worming, this is from Jenny, I was told to give my chickens a worming medicine at the beginning of every season for a preventative measure. Is this a correct use of worming?
There's probably different strategies that people use for worm control. I personally lean much more towards a more tailored sort of worm management approach, rather than sort of basing your chemical use on a calendar. I think if you're just constantly using a chemical based on, this is the day I use the chemical, you may be exposing those worms to chemical more often than is necessary, and that gives them a chance to become resistant. So I'm more of a fan of an integrated management approach, where you are also using those other things, keeping the yard dry, keeping worms out in the first place, and those kinds of things. So I would probably say have a chat with myself or another vet about what is the right management system for your setup, and don't just go with a calendar-based approach.
Okay, thanks, Lou. I think it was good to just tuck them in there. I hope that's okay for you
that's
too.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah, that's no problem. It's probably a good spot to do that anyway. So I'll just see where we're up to here. Oh yeah, and I was just saying, mention in the chat if you gave this chook feeder a go and whether it actually works or not. It looked very appealing on the Gardening Australia segment. So we're still probably on the subject here of external parasites. Moving on from lice, but onto the red mite. So if we're thinking back to our initial sort of scenario, we're now inside the coop. We're inside the house where the chickens are at night. And the red mite is also, it's a blood sucker as well. So it causes distress, because it's really, uncomfortable to be chewed on by mites, these little microscopic insects. But it also causes illness by actually making the birds very anemic. So it's, reducing their sort of red blood cells. And it can be quite severe. It can actually be fatal, a red mite infestation. Now I'm just going to, I just want to play another short clip for you. So just watch that and see what you notice about the sort of behavior or the life cycle of this red mite. So what you can actually see there is that, similar to managing the worms and the lice, using a chemical treatment is only a part of the puzzle. And in fact, with poultry red mite, it's unlikely you're going to be able to see the mites on the bird at all, because as they're moving on and off the chicken, the time that they're feeding is actually happening during the night while the chickens are trying to sleep and are locked up in the coop. The mites actually spend most of their time, the red mite spends most of its time off the chicken. So you need to look more at the external sort of environment within the coop, not specifically on treating the chicken herself. So you can use insecticides like Avitrol or Coopix, which are pyrethrin-based insecticides, and also again the diatomaceous earth, sulfur, lime, so drying out that external environment as well. They're going to potentially have more useful effect than actually trying to treat the chicken herself for the mite infestation. There is a new product that's coming on the market that is registered for red mite in laying chickens, and it actually gets put into their water. They drink it, and then it's long acting. So as the mite jumps on them and has a feed, they actually take in the chemical and it kills them. It's called X-Salt, and it is a very effective chemical, but just like with other chemicals, you want to be using it sort of judiciously as part of an integrated plan, because again, if you just have to keep using the chemical option over and over and over again, they're just going to become resistant to this chemical, and then you've got no tools to manage the problem. So again, sort of looking at all of the life cycle and where those mites actually are, and they are living in little cracks and crevices in the coop for most of the day, and then hopping onto the chicken at night when she's trying to sleep. So when you're designing your coop, think about avoiding sort of real nooks and crannies. You can use oil or wax and things to try and sort of block off those little gaps. You could even, get your vacuum out and vacuum up into those little crevices. And poultry red mite's actually one of the reasons why I don't recommend getting a second-hand wooden coop from somebody else, because it's probably got a lot of sort of mite eggs in there that could just infest the chickens as well. So when you're designing your coop, think about those cracks and crevices, think about materials that are going to potentially harbour them. And although I like the idea of a big natural thick tree branch as a perch, just have a look at that and see if it's a potential home for mites as well before you choose one. And speaking of perching, so chickens roost at night. It's actually not natural for them to sleep in the nest box unless they're broody and sitting on a clutch of eggs. So they're highly motivated to get up onto the perch for sleeping. And if they're not choosing to perch, you need to think about rearranging the furniture, essentially. Now, if you are familiar with how a songbird perches, you would be forgiven for thinking that chickens do the same. So a songbird curls their toes all the way around a branch, as you can see in the picture there. And even some of the pre-constructed chicken coops that you buy will come with a round dowel perch. But actually chickens roost quite differently. They have to have their feet quite a lot flatter. And when they're sleeping, they also rest their keel bone on the perch as well. And the perch is actually really important for having happy and healthy chickens. Making an effort for their comfort in this way is actually going to have surprising health effects. It can stave off social problems, cold, stress, foot problems, infections. And if they're perching so they're not in the nest box, that keeps the nest box cleaner, your eggs are cleaner, you're staving off the chance of food poisoning because there's less poo on the shell of those eggs. So there's genuine real benefits for getting the perch right. So here's some suggestions, sort of in terms of how to construct them. So for the hybrid sort of layer chicken or larger chicken, I recommend about sort of 60 to 65 millimeters wide, a flat perch with a bit of a rounded edge on the top. So broad and flat with a rounded top edge. And then even for a bantam chicken, smaller sized chicken, you're still looking 40 to 50 millimeters wide. You want the perch to be sitting a bit higher than the nest box because they're looking to go up high. So if the nest box is the highest thing, that's where they're going to go. You want enough sort of headspace above the perch so that they can get up there without sort of worrying about injuring themselves. There should be enough space for everybody, plus a bit extra. So if you've got a bit of social issues going there, everyone can move around and find a comfy spot. And make sure that you don't have one perch below another perch because chickens actually do most of their droppings at night. And if they're sitting underneath other chickens, they're going to get pooed on. Probably the best thing is just to offer a selection of different perches as well in different parts of the coop so that they can just, they've got that freedom of choice to find a comfy spot. Speaking of pooping at night, I just wanted to sort of cover off the idea of, as we said, they've sort of perched at night and producing most of their droppings then. Mentioned before that droppings can harbour those worm eggs. It can also carry bacteria and other sort of harmful organisms. And when it breaks down, it produces ammonia. And ammonia is quite toxic. It's toxic to us. It's toxic to the chooks. It affects your immune system, your lung health. And if you can go into the coop and you can smell ammonia, it's already well above safe levels. So you need some sort of strategy to manage that manure in the coop. There are lots of different methods. You've got to work out what's best for you. You can have, a raised mesh so that the poo drops below that. There's something called a poop hammock or a poop board where you can take something out from underneath the perching every day and give that a clean up. Some people prefer to sort of have sand that they can rake out the poo every day. And then there's something called a deep litter system. So that's where you're actually creating a composting environment underneath the chicken. So in terms of what to actually put on the coop floor, essentially everyone has a very strong opinion, but what you're looking for is something that you can easily get. It's available where you are. It's affordable to you. It's not toxic. And it absorbs the liquid portion of the droppings really well, and it's comfortable for the chicks to walk on. So there's a variety of different options there. And then, as I said, in terms of managing that manure, it's either you can choose that it's a daily activity where you're raking out or cleaning out, or with the deep litter method, which is a sort of low exertion method, and you get sort of compost product for the garden at the end of it. That's quite interesting to look at as well, because the composting effect where you're creating the heat is actually killing off some of the infectious organisms in there. And in our cold winters, the heat produced by that composting does make the coop quite cozy at night as well. And it's very insulating too. Now, but just remember, it's not the same thing as just leaving all the poo there and doing nothing with it. A deep litter system is a managed process, but it does mean less sort of active raking out and cleaning out on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so let's review some of the really simple practical changes that I've been talking about in this sort of backyard laying scenario. And hopefully you've seen from what I've been discussing that with not too much effort or expense and just some simple practical changes, you've really improved the chicken's health and well-being. So what have we done? We've given them calcium, remembering that has to be of different sizes and it's available all the time. We've got their food up off the ground. We're keeping that all clean. We've added a bath for parasite control. We've dried up all the wet worm spots. The water bowl is lovely and clean. We've excluded the wild birds, so So we've put maybe a bird netting or something over the top. And we've made sure that the perches are correct and comfy, and inside the coop we're managing the manure. So I hope that was useful. If you're doing these things already, great. Give yourselves a pat on the back. You can now say, I know that my chickens have really good animal welfare and that their health is being looked after. And if you're not doing these things already, there's a few things that you can go out today, in fact, and start putting in place and improve their health and well-being almost immediately. So thank you for listening. I'm going to ask Alex to sort of take back over the controls now, and I think we'll take a few more questions.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. If you want to stop screen sharing, if that's okay.
Yes, I will do that.
Thanks. So Lou, just one little thing that we've got back is that the bucket feeders have been used quite successfully, so that's good.
Oh, great. That's really good to know. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to check in with everyone because it is 10:30 now. So I just want to let you know that we've probably got another 10 minutes to go, but I think it's worth just tapping into Lou while she's here. So I really encourage you to stay with us if you can, but of course, if you can't, that's fine. So I just want to ask you a quick question, Lou, just in relation to, do you have any advice for people who think their chicken is unwell? Like in general terms.
So generally, so I guess the sort of information included in this webinar today is looking at strategies that you can put in place to stave off ill health. You know, it's that preventative side of things. Once it comes to a chicken actually showing signs of illness, it essentially means that she's very, very unwell. Chickens are very stoic. They don't show signs of illness unless, you know, the equivalent would be we'd be rushed off to hospital in an ambulance. You know, that's what you're sort of seeing with a sick chicken. So if you are able to, then what I recommend is trying to see a private vet with that chicken to try and get a diagnosis if you can. Rather than sort of just trying every remedy that you can kind of think of, because some of those things can be harmful if applied to a chicken who's already sick. But really the main focus has got to be all of this preventative stuff, because like I said, once you see signs of ill health, a lot of the time it is too late.
Okay. So there was a couple of questions when people registered, and quite a few people asked this question. How can I help chickens lay during winter? Any tips for keeping, like, is there any reason why, like if someone's purchased chickens and they're 20 to 30 weeks old and they think, oh, I should be starting to lay, is the timing of the actual, you know, the season affecting what's going on there?
It absolutely is. So couple of things that get a chicken into laying mode. One is age. So they've got to go through that sort of puberty phase and then get into a reproductive phase. So age, when you get a chicken, they'll say to you it's point of lay. That's usually based on age. But it is very, very much affected by daylight hours. So let's think about that in terms of chickens in the wild, in nature. They don't want to have little baby chicks during winter because there's less food resources and the elements are harsher. So they pretty much sort of go, okay, well, we won't make baby chickens during the winter, and that's regulated by daylight hours, which that affects their hormone production. So in terms of whether you have chickens that will or won't lay in winter, that sort of natural standpoint is dialed up or dialed down in the breeding. So our laying hybrids are probably, it's dialed right down. They're more likely to breed in winter, and some of the more heritage breeds are less likely to lay eggs in winter. I would say if you want to give it a go, if you want to try and get them laying, really focus on that protein thing I was talking about before. because if you're thinking about the budget of protein and where it's going, there's sort of more expenses, I guess is the best way to put it. There's more expenses in winter. So make sure that protein percentage is up, and that they've got good insulation in the hen house, so they're not sort of spending all their energy trying to keep themselves warm, that kind of thing. But if they don't lay in winter, you just have to accept that chickens don't lay when the daylight hours are short, and you'll have to wait till our daylight starts lengthening again.
Okay, so the commercial egg producers are doing some manipulation with light and some different things like that.
Yes, exactly. So the reason we can get eggs year-round produced from the commercial systems is because they're under lights. And I do know of a couple of people with backyard systems who add a little bit of daylight, artificial light, maybe an extra hour in the morning and the evening to just try and lengthen the time of year where they'll get some eggs. So there are some people manipulating that as well, but without light manipulation, you probably won't get eggs on the really short days of winter. Yeah.
And so we had another question from Mark and a few other people was, what food scraps should or shouldn't I feed chickens?
So firstly, I would just say that scraps are a treat. They're not the main ration. So you can't rely on scraps to support all the function of the chicken, but definitely they're a wonderful way to let them express their natural behaviors, and a good way to recycle your scraps into compost as well. It's, sort of they'll go through the chicken and then they start to break down. You can use the manure on the garden, that kind of thing. Anything really. They're all the variety is probably the main thing. As I said, chickens are omnivores. They're opportunistic. They'll eat quite a lot of things. But again, it's about them being safe to consume. So I really don't like seeing clean out the fridge day and all of that goes to the chickens when you sort of open the Tupperware and you go, ooh, that doesn't look okay. Don't give that to the chickens. You want to be doing things like when you're chopping up your veggies, pop the little the bits that aren't going in your meal into the scraps bucket. Just fresh, healthy bits and pieces from the kitchen are fine. It is sort of not recommended to give avocado. There's a thought that avocado may be a bit toxic to birds. It's definitely toxic to parrots. So probably just keep the avocado out. You can feed them meat. That is okay. It is okay for chickens to eat meat. Again, as I said, they're omnivores. But it's just, fresh and healthy little extra tidbits from the kitchen, basically.
But not too many scraps. That you want them to have the bulk of their food from that.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the way that you can sort of manipulate that is particularly if you're feeding a meal to them, feed them their ration first. Once they've cleaned all of that up, then you can come out with the scraps and throw those around for them. Yeah.
Okay. All right, we've got a question here from Caitlin. She bought a new chook and her other hens pecked it to death.
Oh,
what went wrong, and what could I do next time?
No, I'm sorry to hear that. The social hierarchy between chickens can be quite brutal. I mean, the term pecking order literally comes from the pecking order of poultry. There are probably a few strategies. I think maybe what went wrong there could have been that it was just one single chicken added to an established flock. So I would probably suggest to Caitlin, if she wants to get more chickens, to get them in groups. And also to sort of maybe create a scenario where the two groups can see each other and get to know that the other group's there before actually putting them together. So maybe through a fence or something like that. And then the other thing that is recommended is to add the new chickens in at night into the coop when they're sort of calm and rested at night. It's a bit of social manipulation. It doesn't always go well, and you want to monitor once they've actually gone in to see how that pecking order is sort of sorting itself out. In general, probably the best way to keep the social balance is to do an all-in, all-out system. So you get your flock of chickens that you're going to have for the long term, and then once that flock is sort of finished or gotten into old age and you don't have them anymore, is to get another flock.
Okay. And can ducks and chickens be kept in the same enclosure? And that was from Kylie and Simon.
Mm. I don't recommend it, and the reason I don't is because it goes back to that point about chickens needing very, very clean water. And if you ever watched how ducks behave, they find any bit of water and they make it dirty almost straight away. And ducks need that sort of thing to keep to have their natural behaviors expressed. So you need the water available for the ducks to get their head in and bathe their eyes and things like that. That's important for their health. But they do make the water extremely dirty, and then the chickens don't have access to clean water. So I probably would suggest having separate enclosures, but you could look at, during the free ranging part of the day that they're in the same garden together, but once you sort of lock them away, I would probably have them in different enclosures just to keep that water nice and clean for the chickens.
Okay, Lou. Now we do have a few more questions that have popped up in the chat, but what I might suggest we do, because time is marching on, perhaps I'll share my screen and just run through a little bits that I need to go through, and then if you see anything there that really stands out here that you think needs to be mentioned, maybe perhaps towards the end we'll just slot you back in to address one of those questions.
Sure.
And the other thing was, could you type into the chat box the spelling of the red mite product?
Yes, sure, I can do that. And while I'm doing that, as well, I'll pop in a couple of links in there. I'll put in the website for an article I wrote in our animal health update a couple of months ago, which might cover off a couple of other things that we haven't had a chance to get to. And a link as well to the Department of Primary Industries poultry site, which does have some useful resources in it as well.
Oh, great, Lou. Thanks.
Okay.
And I've just shared your details again too, and the LLS website there.
Great.
So yeah, if you don't mind popping those in now, and I'll just tell people about our upcoming webinars. So we're aware that there was a lot of questions today, and we had quite a lot of people joining us. So I just wanted to let you know that we are going to have another poultry webinar, and that will be with Lou and a special farmer guest. So I have made a note of what we haven't been able to cover, and we will definitely try and address those questions in the next webinar with Lou. As Lou mentioned, she's going to share some of her animal health updates, which also touch on some of the topics that we haven't been able to cover. We have another webinar coming up with Dr. Jason Condor, and this one is all about acid soils. And what are the types of things that might be going on with our soils that are affecting the growth of pastures? So we're really looking forward to bringing you that webinar as well. I just wanted to ask you, if you can, once this webinar is over, you will see a little pop-up come up. And that is for feedback. It'd be really great if you could give your feedback about your webinar experience today and your experience with the Small Farms Network. You can also send me an email. So what I do at workshops is I get people to send me an email and just tell me a few things that really stood out from them from the webinar. And then those things get worked into our workshop summary that I publish on the Small Farms Network website. So I'm just sharing that screen now with the Small Farms Network website. When you go to the website, you can actually sign up for our free newsletter. And I'm publishing that all sorts of information about our workshop summaries and about what we've got coming up. You can also join us on Facebook. And I really hope that you will do that today if you are able to, if you have time. I'm just going to say a few thanks. I'd like to thank Alice and Haji for their time in help set this webinar up, and also being there for technical support during the webinar today. And just apologise for my little dog deciding that he's going to have a bark there right in the middle, but hopefully that just makes it real for everybody, makes it real that we're actually talking from home. Lou, did you want to turn your mic back on and share anything with anyone?
Yeah, I'm just sharing a few links in the chat there. So I put in that Essentials for Backyard Layers, the DPI website, the Local Land Services website, the Small Farms website. I was just double checking the spelling of that other red mite product, so I'll post that in a moment. Just thanks very much to Capital Region Small Farms Network for inviting me to talk. I think it's wonderful how many people joined us this morning. I hope it was helpful. Looking forward to reading the chat and the feedback afterwards, because I wasn't able to keep an eye on the chat while I was presenting. Yes, and if anyone does want to track me down, just head to that LLS website, and I'm always happy to get an email and shoot you an email back with some ideas if you've got any questions.
All right, so do you want to, I think we might share that that product in our workshop summary, Lou?
Yeah, that would be great, actually, because I do just want to make sure that that I get the spelling right. It's called Exalt, but I'm not sure exactly how it's spelled. So
that's okay. And Lou's kindly agreed for that we can publish her her presentation from today as well. So great, thanks so much for your time, Lou. Thanks to everyone for joining us here today. And I hope to see you at another webinar or workshop soon. See you later, Lou.
Thanks very much. See you. Bye.
Bye.